Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. Today's conversation really centers around how technology is empowering what's called the common operating picture, especially in security-focused applications. And to have that conversation today and really set the table for what that means and what that means across all sorts of different providers and real-time crime centers and even public safety as a whole, we've got two folks on to have that conversation today to really dive in a little bit deeper. The first is Brian Wanner from Diversified, and the other gentleman is Mr. Dan Gundry from Barco. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. Happy to be here.
Happy to be here with my B&B.
Well, look, at this point, we've got a pretty good rapport, so I think we're going to have a fun conversation today. But one of the challenges I think that we struggle with as a global world of technology is getting a really full, quote-unquote, picture about how our technology is leveraged across different verticals. So I wanted to specifically talk about really the idea of creating a common operating picture today in places like real-time crime centers, whether that be for a PD or emergency response and things like that. And I know that those worlds are a little bit separate, but wanted to start, right? When you hear common operating picture, for a lot of folks, you think military or you think mission critical applications, obviously, which tends to cross over to the world of public safety. But Brian, if you would kind of set the table for us in the world of security specifically, what are some of the things when you hear common operating picture, what are some of the things that really brings out for you?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. So as soon as I hear common operating picture, I envision dashboards. I envision the larger displays, the video walls, but also the monitors at the desk. And the operator is our key focus, right? And how do we influence their daily responses to tasks, whether they be a dark sky or green sky event, emergency operation, a police event that requires an instant real-time decision. And that common operating picture is really that tool, that analytical summary of information that gives them the ability to answer those questions and make actual decisions that impact the public and their operation.
And Dan, how does that vary? Does that vary by application? I know I mentioned public safety in places like real-time crime centers. Is that largely similar across those verticals, or does it vary a little bit?
It can vary a little bit. If you look at certain control rooms, we like to talk about video walls. It's one of the technologies that we deploy in those spaces. And a large-scale video wall, it embodies the common operational picture. Right? You're not actively doing work on a video wall above your working task level in front of you on your local monitors. But that common operational picture has ancillary and additional information that can help you just kind of understand the posture of my practice today. For control rooms where everybody's facing the same direction towards that video wall, that's great. But there are control rooms, a lot of 911 centers, speaking about public safety, where their layouts are more pod-based and they're not all looking at the same object wall. So their version of a common operational picture might be distributed displays that are hung up high that might have that dashboard that Brian mentioned earlier. So every control room is different, every application is different, but I would say 911, maybe not a large-scale video wall with a single common operational picture, but real-time crime centers and other EOCs, definitely that resonates.
Well, Brian, what I keep thinking about, even as Dan, was talking there, is the word ecosystem, right? I think, maybe historically it was easy to say, oh, everything that is on the video wall is what we would consider our common operating or operational picture. But now that's expanded, right? You talked about individual workstations. You talked about really decentralized folks. And one of the things that includes is decentralized data sources, right? Whether that's traffic cameras, whether that's weather, whether that's population density, all sorts of different things. In a modern control room, especially in this world, what are some of the external data points that really help provide this common operational picture?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. It surely is an ecosystem now, especially in public safety, where you might have a city manager who is pulling information in or sending information in. You may have social media. You may have transportation data or video management software suites that are coming in through VMS platform. And then you have the police unification platform as well. So you have all these different data points all coming from different departments within a city, a state, FEMA, military. You may have, or even, state web sources that are pulling from, out here in California with Caltrans or Cal Fire, and all that data is coming from different web-based but state-owned web pages that are publicly available. But it's pulling in so much data now and being able to view it and then again make those decisions.
You know, what's really interesting too, we talk about that influx of data, and it's easy to have, analysis paralysis, right? Where you have all these different inputs of data and information flowing at you. But really, at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of some of the tools, but also the operators to help interpret that to drive a response, right? At the end of the day, we want to be able to create control rooms and ecosystems and places where we drive operators to respond. Dan, I want to ask specifically in the world kind of real-time crime centers, right? Especially down here in Dallas, I know that there's a great one as well. And, a lot of that data that comes in might be based on a parade that's happening for, a sports team that's just won a championship, or, a protest, or, all sorts of different things. What sort of obligations do the operator have from a decision-making standpoint in that world of real-time crime centers?
Well, in most real-time crime centers, they're the ones that are sitting in the chair making those decisions. They're the ones that are supporting the frontline, officers that are out there affecting a stop or a search or, some other type of incident response. So ultimately, they do have a significant amount of responsibility. How they parse through that information is very application specific, right? You mentioned Dallas, specifically, they're going to have a specific set of problems that they deal with that maybe, say, even, Arlington doesn't have or Fort Worth doesn't have, right? So very specific, rodeo, Fort Worth, go for it. So they're going to be very different in terms of how they're going to execute on that. The other thing is, every real-time crime center is going to have a different SOP. And do I have a sworn officer sitting in that chair versus a civilian in that chair? Because they're going to be looking at things through different lenses as well. So all those different ingredients play into it. But it's definitely a conversation that every one of those real-time crime centers needs to have internally in terms of how do we empower our operators? To what degree are those officers or those agents sitting in those chairs empowered to make decisions? At what point do they need to escalate it, bring in other resources? So that's a very individual, not just even real-time crime centers, but every control room should have that SOP conversation around, workflow and engagement and empowerment.
Well, Dan, you bring up a really interesting point. We'll call it interoperability, right? Whether that's, something in the public sector, whether that's Dallas police and Frisco and, Fort Worth police needing to collaborate, but it also is cross-city organizational, right? You've got local utilities, you've got transportation providers and even airlines and things like that. And Brian, I want to ask, right, especially in that world of public safety, you have to have that level of interoperability. How are you seeing, whether it's organizations at the municipal or city level, or even some private sector companies, how are you seeing folks collaborate to really make sure that data is crossing over and it really is impactful across a lot of different places?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have different clients and it's all about their processes, right? And their workflows and how they're going to manage their different assets. But interoperability across not only a single facility, but multiple facilities throughout different regions, throughout different departments. That's become a huge trend in our world, in our industry over the last few years. And we're really seeing more and more folks monitor and operate multiple locations out of a centralized position. So they don't have to staff different folks or IT folks in these different regional state EOCs or state RTCCs that may share information with smaller municipalities that can also be leveraging the technology or the investment that the larger location had made. So we're seeing it in twofold. One, on the staffing side, I'm seeing it. And then as far as the technology goes, they're actually able to share and send and receive different video or audio content from one location to the other, assuming the network will allow for it and assuming their security will allow for it.
Well, and Dan, I want to ask too, right? We talk about all those different data points, and I mentioned earlier the idea of analysis paralysis. How do you take all that information, especially folks that you're collaborating with, and structure it in a way that's not only beneficial, but easy to access and easy to see and easy to make decisions from?
Yeah, there's definitely some potential there for situational blindness. Going back to the other question, technologically, we know how to bring in all that content from those disparate sources and from those third-party agencies and the different types and different flavors of content. Really, that becomes an administrative question as to whether or not I can get that feed from that agency. Do I have access to it? And then how do you access that information? But then once you have access to the information, how do you make sense of it, right? How do I parse through and actually see the forest for the trees? there's automated tools. Brian mentioned it earlier on when we were defining common operational picture relative to dashboards. Single pane of glass type of software packages are out there to kind of aggregate that. The visual plane, such as a Barco video wall or some of our solutions, and what Diversified does, those are things where we can take in those alarms and those triggers, and we can do something with it. We can automate the situational awareness, make changes to the video wall, make changes to the operator's workstation. We can put sound in there or lighting in there to make changes in the spaces. So all those things come down to, again, almost an overused phrase, at least in our conversation here, workflow. You've got to figure out what that looks like for you as an individual organization, where your content's coming in, and then how that workflow changes from incident to incident is also something that's going to change. You can't always predict the kinds of incidents, but guess what? They usually fall into a couple of buckets that we've seen before. So we're not starting from scratch most of the time.
Well, Dan, you talk about workflow, and Brian, I want to kick this question to you. A lot of times probably, folks might think the world of real-time crime centers and 911 dispatch and emergency response and things like that tend to have more reactive workflows where an accident has to occur or something has gone wrong. And the reality is that's not entirely true, right? There's a lot of proactivity and predictivity that happens. How are you seeing a lot of these real-time crime centers and public safety command centers leverage a lot of that proactivity to help maybe prevent whether it be crime or whether it be, accidents or congestions on the road? What are some of the ways that you're seeing them be able to leverage that data more proactively?
Yeah, I mean, they're really just monitoring, right? So when we're pulling in all these different data points, you can be proactive by monitoring different social media sites, different assets that you may have from a VMS standpoint, and then having that information or AI even available where you can analyze all of this data, all of this endpoints, not only through a human operator, but also through technology. You're able to predict and start utilizing different technology tools to make predictive analysis and start to analyze that data and events and different actions by those algorithms and different processes.
And Dan, I know that you had kind of some context you wanted to provide there as well. I'll go ahead and give you the floor. Same question to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important is to understand one of the missions of a real-time crime centers is to provide that proactive support for an officer who is responding to an incident. So between the time that there's a 911 call and an officer is dispatched, those minutes are precious. So one of the things the real-time crime center is doing is providing information, intel, and analysis so that officer is walking into that situation educated and informed, which is also going to help to minimize or mitigate risk out there for the officer. So in and of itself, the existence of a real-time crime center, their mission is proactively de-escalating and mitigating risk.
Well, we talk about proactivity and predictivity, and a lot of that comes down to the operator, specifically being able to interpret a lot of that data. And, I was having a conversation with, a representative from a local PD here in Texas, and he talked about how one of the challenges that he ran into was not only hiring some of those operators and retaining them, but training them effectively, right? Being able to train people on new technologies and train people on certain workflows and things like that. And I'm going to ask this question to both of you as well, but Brian, I want to have you start, especially when you install technology and you roll out new strategies and new workflows. Training is so important. What are some of the best strategies you've seen, especially in the world of real-time crime center and public safety, for people really being able to effectively train a lot of those operators to best leverage that technology?
Yeah, for sure. It starts with discovery and day one and understanding what the actual processes are going to be, what the future processes are going to be, and having those conversations early on. And then we can understand what their use case is, how they plan to use the technology, or things they haven't thought about in leveraging the technology. And throughout the implementation phase, but also at the end during training, we can help set up different tools and assets through technology that we're familiar with to influence their decision-making and take a lot of those clicks or keystrokes off of the operators during these critical events. So it's really an entire project cycle, all the way through training, all the way through, years after we've implemented a system where they might not have a new workflow, the buzzword of today, and understanding, hey, maybe the operations have changed. Maybe they have a new use case. Maybe they have a new event or had an event that caused the need to implement a new tool. And having these modular and scalable systems are really to the benefit of our end users, and then allow us to help them create those workflows through technology that they may not be thinking of, and then enable them to train a lot of police officers or IT staff or different personnel who are responsible for these assets through simplified user tools and assets that we work with every day.
And Dan, same question.
Okay, so this actually hits a couple of different key points. So first and foremost, specifically spot on, I'm a real big fan of peer-to-peer training and mentoring. I think when you get a new operator in there, putting them with somebody who's seasoned will help to ease some of that transition. But taking a little bit of a step at a higher level back away, Barco's been really good over the years at doing research. That's one of the things that we do really good. So in 2023, we came out with a survey of 1,000 control room professionals, not necessarily specific in one vertical market, actually probably or a mix of different vertical markets. One of the things that I found most interesting about that, specifically around the operator, and the operator, hands down, to the point from your PD contact, they are the greatest asset and the greatest risk in any control room. The greatest asset is that a well-trained, well-fed, balanced team can affect great results for any control room and any mission that's out there. Greatest risk speaks to that operator survey, which is the operator survey tells us that 40% of control room operators are looking to leave their job in the next 6 months. That speaks to the stress of the position. That speaks to potentially a lack of training. It speaks to, just the immense burden that they are under on a regular basis. Conversely, that same survey, next question, or one of the next questions was, the deployment of the right technology and the right environment pushes job satisfaction up to 75% on a sliding scale, which speaks to that retention perspective. So I don't think it's just about training, but I also think it's them having the right tool sets and the right environment to work under, as opposed to just, opening up a laptop and doing it, right? So the right conditions, the right technologies, and the right kind of support.
Inevitably, and this is actually a really great thing that I love about, having the conversation about, mission critical command centers and things like that. We always inevitably end up coming to talk about the operator, because it's one of the industries that really uniquely, whether you want to call it, someone who's an air traffic controller or who works in a real-time crime center, there is that human element that has to exist in so many of our control rooms. And I think, to your point, Dan, there is a little bit of risk there. And I think that we recognize that, but humans do provide a little bit of risk and flexibility, which is their greatest strength, is also sometimes their greatest weakness, is that there's an ability to interpret that information. Sometimes we can turn it off, sometimes we can turn it on. But I want to ask Brian, and I think that this is a conversation that, a lot of operators are having, at least tangentially and anecdotally, throughout the industry. They have a lot of questions about AI. They have a lot of questions about job security and things like that. And without you don't have to get into the weeds with a lot of it, but what are some of the ways that we could continue to provide value for operators, and whether it's through providing job security or training or education or retention programs, what are some of the ways that we can continue to provide meaningful value and support for our operator community?
Yeah, absolutely. The operators aren't going anywhere. We value them. We need them, and their role in this is essential. And I think, kind of backing up is their involvement. In so many cases, we see decisions being made by folks that aren't even leveraging the technology in the room, and they're really feeling blind to the entire project or even the system. And, involving them throughout the project, throughout the phase, it gives them the ownership of the system, and they're actually turning into early adopters, is what I'm finding. And then they're actually getting excited about the technology and seeing the benefits personally, and also as a community towards, evolving with the technology and becoming partnered with it, not seeing it as a competitor or someone or something that's out to take their job or replace humans in the control room. So just influencing and enhancing their role.
Well, and Dan, I'll give you the same question, and we'll wrap with this. What are some of the ways that we can continue to best serve our operator communities?
Well, I personally, I don't know if I can add much to what Brian said. He really hit it on the head. I think engaging them early, engaging them often, making them feel like they're a part of the decision as opposed to forcing something down their throat. I would also encourage people to engage experts in the control room space that can help provide benchmarking, that can help provide some of that foundation. The one thing I know is that control room managers, whether that's a real-time crime center, a PSAP, a utility, whatever that control room is, they don't get a chance to get out there and benchmark with their peers in the marketplace. So a control room professional like Brian, like the team at Diversified, brings that perspective in because they're out there all the time talking to people. They're bringing insights. They're bringing true trends in terms of the operations. And I think that also goes a long way. The operators feel like they're in it. They're in a community because there's people out there that are advising, that understand it because they live into it. So I think it's the only other thing I would add to it. But, Brian hit it on the head.
Well, gentlemen, look, I think it was a great conversation today, especially through that lens of creating that common operational picture, whether that's through the perspective of the operator themselves or through empowering folks with technology. I think that you both did a fantastic job of providing some extra context for there. And look, I'm sure we'll have the two of you back on soon because, look, this world is so desperate for education as we have so many folks, whether it's technology solutions providers like Diversified or hardware manufacturers and partners like Barco. There's so much collaboration and education that has to continue to happen throughout the community. So I appreciate you both coming on today, and we look forward to having you back on soon.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you for tuning in as well. Be sure to join us next time on the show.